thought we were just driving home after a quiet Sunday dinner. I had no idea that within the next 20 minutes, my husband would stop the car on a dark stretch of highway, tell me to get out, and drive away, leaving me alone on the road with nothing but my purse and the wreckage of everything I thought I knew about my marriage. And the worst part, the part that still makes my stomach drop when I think about it, is that it wasn't even the most devastating thing that happened that night. Because 20 minutes after Marcus's taillights disappeared into the dark, a black SUV slowed to a stop beside me, and the man who stepped out was my boss, Daniel Reeves. And the look on his face told me he already knew far more about my situation than I did. My name is Clara Whitfield, and for 4 years I believed I had built something real. Not perfect, no marriage is, but real. The kind of life where Sunday mornings smell like ground coffee and warm toast, where the light comes through the kitchen curtains in long gold stripes, where you know which floorboard creaks and you step over it without thinking because the house has become part of your body. Marcus and I had bought that house 18 months into our marriage, a pale yellow colonial on Elmwood Drive with a wraparound porch and a backyard that flooded every spring, but that we loved anyway. I had put in 60% of the down payment. That detail matters. Remember it. I worked as a senior financial analyst at Reeves & Partners, one of the mid-sized investment consultancies in the city. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid well, very well, especially after my promotion 14 months ago. My salary had climbed to a number that still sometimes surprised me when I saw it on paper. Marcus worked in urban planning for the city government, a steady, respectable job that he genuinely loved, though it paid considerably less. We had always understood this without making it a source of tension, or so I believed. I handled most of the mortgage, he handled utilities and groceries, and we split the rest through a shared account that we both contributed to equally. It felt fair. It felt like a partnership. It felt, I realize now, like the kind of arrangement that looks perfectly balanced from the outside and is quietly being undermined from the inside. Marcus's mother, Donna Whitfield, she kept his last name after his father left, which she mentioned approximately once every 3 weeks, had always been what I would charitably describe as a presence. She was a tall woman, thin in the way that suggests discipline rather than delicacy, with silver hair she wore in a severe chignon and a smile that arrived a half-second too late, as though she had to consciously decide to deploy it. She called Marcus every single day. Not texts, calls, actual phone calls, sometimes twice. She had opinions about everything: how I cooked, how I decorated, how often we visited, how I dressed for family gatherings. In the early years, I absorbed it all with the patient tolerance of someone who tells herself that difficult mothers-in-law are a universal experience, that it isn't personal, that love for her son is simply expressing itself in clumsy, intrusive ways. I was wrong about that. I understand now that Donna Whitfield did not do anything without purpose. The Sunday dinner where everything finally broke had been her idea, as most of her dinners were. She lived 40 minutes from us, in the house where Marcus had grown up, a large, heavily furnished Victorian that she maintained with the obsessive care of a person whose identity lives entirely within 4 walls. The table was always set formally, with cloth napkins and the good china, even for just the 3 of us. I had long since stopped finding this charming. That particular Sunday, the roast was overdone, and the conversation was undercooked, drifting through neutral topics: the neighbor's new fence, a television series Donna had started, the weather that week, until dessert arrived, and Donna folded her napkin, placed it beside her plate with deliberate precision, and looked at me with that half-second smile. "Clara," she said, "I've been meaning to talk to you about something, about the house." I remember the exact quality of the silence that followed. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticking, the distant sound of the refrigerator's hum, Marcus reaching for his water glass and not putting it down. "The house?" I repeated. "Elmwood Drive," she said, as though I might be confused about which house we lived in. "I've been doing some research. The market in that neighborhood has peaked, I think. It would be a very good time to sell. Marcus and I have been looking at properties closer to here, There's a lovely development about 12 minutes away, much more practical for the long term." She paused, letting that land. "And of course, the profit from the sale would give you both a real cushion, a fresh start." I looked at Marcus. He was looking at his water glass. "Donna," I said carefully, "the house is not for sale. We're not planning to move." "Well, of course it's just a conversation," she said, with the particular brightness of someone who has decided the conversation is not just a conversation. "I only think it's worth discussing. Marcus agrees it makes financial sense, don't you, sweetheart?" And Marcus, my husband, the man I had shared a bed and a mortgage and 4 years of Sundays with, said, quietly, looking at a point somewhere between his water glass and the table's edge, "I mean, it might be worth thinking about." That was the moment. That was the first crack, the one I couldn't unsee. I said very little for the rest of dinner. I helped clear the table. I thanked Donna for the meal in a voice I kept carefully level. I walked to the car with my keys in my hand and my jaw so tight I could feel it in my temples. We drove for 11 minutes in complete silence before I said, "She wants us to sell the house and move closer to her." "She's just worried about the long-term investment," Marcus said. "She said you'd already been looking at properties." A pause. "She mentioned some listings. I didn't think it was a big deal." "You were looking at properties with your mother without telling me." "Clara, you're making this into something it isn't." And then I made the mistake of saying exactly what I felt, in exactly the way I felt it, without the careful modulation I'd been trained by years of keeping the peace to employ. I told him that his mother had been inserting herself into our financial decisions for years, that her suggestions were not suggestions, that her interest in the house felt possessive and calculated, that his silence on the matter, his consistent, reliable, suffocating silence, made me feel completely alone in my own marriage. I said it all. I didn't yell, but I didn't soften it either. Marcus pulled the car over. We were on Route 9, the long stretch of highway that cuts through the dark commercial district between his mother's neighborhood and ours. Used car lots closed for the night, a shuttered diner, a storage facility with orange security lights. He pulled into a gravel turnout beside a chain-link fence and stopped the car with a jerk of the brake. "Get out," he said. I thought he was joking. I actually laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. "Marcus!" "Get out of the car, Clara. I need a minute." "You're not serious." He leaned across me and opened my door. The night air came in cold and smelling of exhaust and old asphalt. And I, because some part of me still could not believe this was actually happening, because I thought surely he would stop. Surely he would reach for my arm and say, "I'm sorry. Get back in. Let's talk." I got out. I stood on the gravel with my purse on my shoulder and watched Marcus Whitfield pull the car back onto Route 9 and drive away. His taillights went red, then small, then gone. I stood there for a moment that felt much longer than it was. The gravel was damp. Somewhere behind the storage facility, a dog was barking steadily, mechanically, at nothing. I took out my phone and called Marcus. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I opened a rideshare app, but we were in a coverage gap. The nearest driver was 31 minutes away. I thought about calling my father. I thought about sitting down on the gravel and crying. I did neither. Instead, I stood in the orange light of the storage facility's security lamp and understood, with a cold and clarifying certainty, that something in my marriage had broken tonight, and that it had not broken because of the argument. It had broken because the argument had revealed something that had already been broken for a long time, something I had refused to see. I don't know exactly how long I stood there, long enough that the dog stopped barking, long enough that I had gone from shock to anger to a strange, almost crystalline calm. And then headlights appeared, slowing as they approached, and a black SUV, a Lexus, I noticed, which was the kind of detail my mind grabbed onto because it was easier than the larger situation, pulled onto the gravel beside me. The window came down first. Then the door opened, and Daniel Reeves stepped out. Daniel was 53, silver-templed, the kind of man who wore good coats and didn't explain himself. He had built Reeves and Partners from a two-person operation into a firm of 40 analysts, and he ran it with the particular authority of someone who had learned, a long time ago, that the best decisions are made quietly. He had been my professional mentor for 3 years. He had given me my promotion. He was also, I realized with a lurch, looking at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before, something between relief and deep unease, the look of someone who has been dreading a specific conversation and has just run out of reasons to postpone it. "Clara," he said, "not, 'What are you doing here?' Not, 'Are you all right?' Just my name, like an acknowledgement of something inevitable." "Daniel," I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "This is a strange place to run into each other." He glanced down the highway in the direction Marcus's taillights had gone. Then he looked back at me. "Get in the car," he said. "I'll drive you home, and there are some things I need to tell you." I got in. The interior smelled of leather and something faintly cedar-like, expensive and calm in a way that made the last hour feel even more surreal. Daniel pulled back onto Route 9 and drove for almost a full minute without speaking. I waited. I had learned, working for Daniel, that he always chose his words like a man who understood their weight. "How long have you known Marcus's mother?" he finally said. 4 years, I said, "since Marcus and I started dating. Why?" Another pause. The highway lights slid across the windshield in long orange stripes. "She came to see me," he said, 3 weeks ago, at the office. She made an appointment under a different name." My hands were in my lap. I felt them go very still. "She told me," Daniel said, his voice careful and precise, "that you had been experiencing significant personal difficulties. Emotional instability, she called it. She said you had been making erratic decisions at home, that Marcus was concerned about your state of mind, and that she thought it might be affecting your work." He paused again. "She suggested that a quiet conversation about your performance, or perhaps a restructuring of your role, might be in everyone's best interest." The words arrived one at a time, and each one landed somewhere specific, like stones placed deliberately rather than thrown. My professional reputation. That was the target. Not the house, or not only the house. Donna Whitfield had come to my place of work, introduced herself under a false name, and attempted to have me professionally undermined. The calculation of it was breathtaking. While she was serving us overdone roast and suggesting we sell the house, she had already, 3 weeks earlier, been laying groundwork somewhere I had never thought to look. "What did you tell her?" My voice was still steady. I was amazed by this. "I told her that your performance reviews were consistently the highest in your division, that I had no concerns about your professional conduct whatsoever, and that she should leave my office." He glanced at me briefly. "She didn't like that. She said she had documentation, some kind of letter. She claimed it was from Marcus, confirming her concerns." "A letter," I repeated. "I didn't read it. I should tell you that. I told her I wasn't interested in correspondence from family members of my employees about their private lives, and I asked security to walk her out." He paused. "But I kept thinking about it. I looked you up in the system after she left, and I noticed something in your benefits file. Your emergency contact is still your father, but your beneficiary designation on the life insurance was changed 8 months ago." The car felt very quiet. "Changed to what?" I said, though I think I already knew. "To Marcus," he said, "which is normal for a spouse. But the secondary beneficiary, it used to be your father. It was changed at the same time to a Donna Whitfield." I did not make a sound. I looked at the highway ahead of us, at the headlights dissolving into the dark, and I felt something happen inside my chest that I can only describe as a lock turning. Not grief. I would feel that later, in waves, for a long time. Not even anger yet. Something colder than anger. Something that felt like the beginning of a decision. "I didn't authorize that change," I said. "I know," Daniel said quietly. That's why I'm telling you." We drove for a while without speaking. I needed the silence. I needed the dark highway and the hum of the engine, and the quiet weight of what Daniel had just told me to settle somewhere inside my body before I could think clearly. Someone had changed my beneficiary designation. Someone had gone into my HR file, which required either system access or a forged authorization form, and quietly inserted Donna Whitfield's name as the secondary recipient of my life insurance policy. And 3 weeks ago, that same woman had walked into my employer's office under a false name and attempted to have me professionally destabilized, while her son was kissing me goodbye in the mornings, while I was making the mortgage payments on a house I had put 60% down on, while I was cooking dinners and attending family Sundays and telling myself that the cracks I kept noticing were just the ordinary wear of any long marriage. I asked Daniel to drop me at home rather than at his office, and he agreed without question. Before I got out of the car, he handed me a business card with a name written on the back in his precise, narrow handwriting. "Employment attorney," he said. "She's excellent. And Clara, document everything, starting tonight. Timestamps matter." I nodded. I thanked him. I walked up the path to my pale yellow Colonial on Elmwood Drive, and I unlocked the door with the key that had lived on my keychain for 3.5 years. And I went inside. Marcus was not home. The kitchen light was on, the way I always left it. The house smelled of the candle I'd burned that morning, amber and cedar, and the faint ghost of the coffee we'd shared before driving to his mother's. I stood in the hallway for a long moment, looking at the familiar geography of my own living room, the cream sofa we'd argued mildly about before I caved, the framed print above the fireplace that I'd chosen alone, the small stack of library books on the end table that were all mine. I thought, how much of this was ever really shared? I did not cry. Instead, I went to my laptop. Our HR portal required two-factor authentication, but I had access to my own file through the employee self-service platform. I logged in and navigated to the benefits section and opened the beneficiary page. The change was there, exactly as Daniel had described, made 8 months ago on a Tuesday afternoon between 2 and 3 o'clock, a time when I was reliably in client meetings and would not have been near a computer. Primary beneficiary, Marcus Whitfield. Secondary beneficiary, Donna Whitfield. The authorization method listed was employee request via HR representative. But I had made no such request. I had never contacted HR about my beneficiary designations. I printed the page and noted the timestamp, and then I sat at the kitchen table and thought about Tuesday afternoons 8 months ago. And I thought about who else might have had access to my personnel file. And I thought about Marcus's email password, which he had given me once during a trip when he needed me to check something, and which I had never used and had somehow never forgotten. I opened a new browser window. I told myself I wasn't going to feel guilty about this. His inbox loaded in under a minute. I want to be honest about what happened next, because the truth is more complicated and more painful than a single smoking gun email. There was no single message that laid everything out cleanly. Instead, there was a pattern, a slow, terrible accumulation of fragments that individually might have been explained away, but together formed something unmistakable. There was a thread with his mother going back 14 months in which she discussed, in the careful, euphemistic language of people who know they are being indirect but aren't quite ready to be explicit, the long-term plan for what she called consolidating assets. There were references to a conversation with someone named Phil, a name I didn't recognize, about the Elmwood property. There was a message from 6 months ago in which Donna wrote, "I spoke to Phil again. He says as long as the documentation is in order, the timeline works. We just need to make sure C doesn't have prior notice." And Marcus had replied, "Understood. I'll handle the account access question this week. C, my initial. C doesn't have prior notice." My hands were not shaking. They had gone past shaking into a strange steadiness, the steadiness of someone who has received news so large it hasn't fully registered as real yet. I was C. I was the variable in their equation, the obstacle in their plan, the person who needed to not have prior notice. My husband had been corresponding with his mother for over a year about something involving my house and an unidentified contact named Phil, and he had deliberately kept me unaware of it. And he had written the words, "I'll handle the account access question," in a message that arrived in the same week my beneficiary designation was changed by someone who wasn't me. I screenshot everything. I forwarded the relevant emails to my personal account. I sat at the kitchen table until 2 in the morning, going back through 14 months of correspondence, and what I assembled over those hours was the following. Donna Whitfield had been working with a real estate contact, Phil, who turned out, based on a later email's full signature, to be Philip Rourke of Rourke Property Solutions, to engineer a situation in which Marcus and I would sell the house. The proceeds would be split in a way that routed a significant portion through a joint account that Donna had co-signing access to, and the remainder would be used to purchase a property closer to her that she would have ongoing advisory involvement in. The phrase advisory involvement appeared 3 times. It was, I understood clearly, a polite term for control. And Marcus, my husband, the man who had kissed me that morning, who had handed me the keys to our house with a smile the day we moved in, had not been coerced into this plan. He had been its co-architect. I heard his key in the lock at 2:30. I was still at the kitchen table. I had not turned off any of the lights. Marcus came in looking tired and defensive in equal measure, the expression of a man who has been rehearsing an explanation in the car. He stopped when he saw me. He saw the open laptop. He saw the printed pages. He saw my face, which must have told him everything. "Clara," he said. "Sit down," I said. My voice was quiet. I had decided, somewhere around midnight, that I was not going to perform this conversation. I was not going to cry or yell or let him watch me fall apart. I was going to be very still and very precise, and I was going to say exactly what I knew, and I was going to watch what he did with it. He sat down across from me. He looked at his hands. "I read your emails," I said. "I know about Phil Rourke. I know about the Elmwood plan. I know that your mother came to my office 3 weeks ago under a false name and tried to have me fired. And I know that someone changed my beneficiary designation 8 months ago on a Tuesday afternoon when I was in client meetings." I paused. "Tell me I'm wrong about any of it." He didn't say I was wrong. He said, "It wasn't supposed to go this far." "What was it supposed to go?" I said. "Walk me through the version where this was fine." "My mother needed security," he said. He still wasn't looking at me. His voice had the quality of something that had been practiced and was now failing to hold its shape. "She's getting older. The house is more than we need. The market is good right now. I thought if the transition happened smoothly, you were going to route the sale proceeds through an account she has access to," I said. "I found the email where you and she discussed it. You called it the consolidation structure." He flinched. "And the beneficiary change," I said. "Did you call HR and impersonate me, Marcus, or did your mother?" A long silence. The refrigerator hummed. The amber candle had burned out hours ago, and the house smelled only of itself now, old wood and cold air and the particular staleness of a space where something has gone wrong. "She said it was just a precaution," he said finally, "in case something happened to you. She said it was standard estate planning." "Standard estate planning," I repeated. "Your mother impersonated me to my HR department to insert her own name into my life insurance policy, and you knew about it, and you said nothing to me." I let that sit in the air for a moment. "How long have you known?" He didn't answer. "How long, Marcus?" "About the HR thing? Maybe 5 months." His voice was barely audible. "She told me after she'd done it. I told her it was too far. She said it was already done, and it didn't matter. It was just paperwork." "Just paperwork." I closed the laptop. "I want you to leave tonight." He looked up then. "Clara, I'm not asking," I said. "I'm telling you." Get what you need for a few nights. Leave your key on the table. We will speak through attorneys. Something crossed his face. Relief, I thought, with a sharp and nauseating clarity. The expression of a man who had been waiting to be released from something and had not had the courage to release himself. He nodded. He went upstairs. He was back down in 15 minutes with a bag. He put his key on the table, as I'd asked. He paused at the door. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know," I said. Not because I forgave him, because I believed he was sorry, in the small, insufficient way of someone who is sorry he got caught, sorry the plan had complications, sorry the cost of his passivity had turned out to be higher than he'd budgeted for. I believed his sorrow was real, and I believed it was entirely beside the point. He left. I listened to his car back out of the driveway, and I sat in the kitchen of my house, with my 60% down payment and my name on the deed and my mortgage payments, and I allowed myself exactly 10 minutes of shaking. My hands finally let themselves tremble. My breath came in long, ragged pulls. I pressed my palms flat on the table and breathed until I was steady again. And then I picked up my phone and called my father. My father, Robert Whitfield, no relation, it was a coincidence that it amused us both at the wedding, answered on the second ring despite the hour. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, which is one of his great gifts. When I finished, there was a brief silence, and then he said, "Do you want me to come tonight or first thing in the morning?" I told him morning. I told him to bring coffee. He said, "I'll be there at 7. Don't touch anything else in that house until I get there." He was a retired civil attorney, and the way he said it, calm, practical, already in motion, was the first thing in several hours that felt like solid ground. The attorney Daniel had recommended, her name was Susan Park, took my call the following Monday morning and had reviewed my documentation by Wednesday. What she told me, across a conference table with a view of the city skyline and a cup of coffee I didn't drink, was methodical and serious and not entirely surprising. The unauthorized beneficiary change was identity fraud. The false name visit to my employer constituted, at minimum, defamation and potentially tortious interference with employment. The email correspondence documenting a coordinated plan to maneuver me out of my marital asset without my knowledge had significant legal implications for the divorce proceedings. Philip Rourke of Rourke Property Solutions, it emerged, had a prior civil complaint filed against him for facilitating a similar scheme 3 years earlier, a complaint that had been settled quietly and whose records Susan obtained within 48 hours of starting her search. The good news, Susan said, in the measured tone of someone who has delivered both kinds, is that the house is unambiguously protected. The deed is in both your names, and without your signature, nothing can be transferred or listed. The beneficiary change will be reversed. The HR fraud complaint is being filed today. The more complex question is whether you want to pursue the full scope of this criminally, or whether you're satisfied with the civil route and the divorce settlement. She looked at me. "What do you want, Clara?" I thought about it for a moment. I thought about Donna Whitfield sitting across from me at her formally set Sunday table, serving overdone roast with a half-second smile while she had already known for months, exactly what she and her son had been building behind my back. I thought about Marcus's key on the kitchen table. I thought about the word consolidation, used as a synonym for theft. "Both," I said. "I want both." The complaint filed with the city's fraud and identity theft unit named Donna Whitfield as the individual who had impersonated me in the HR system. Within 3 weeks, Philip Rourke had been contacted as part of a broader inquiry. It emerged that the scheme he'd been involved in with Marcus and Donna was not his first such arrangement, and the civil complaint from 3 years prior was reopened. Marcus, to his credit, or perhaps to the credit of the attorney his mother could no longer afford to pay for once the civil proceedings began, agreed to a settlement that awarded me sole ownership of the house in exchange for a buyout of his equity at fair market value, which I was able to arrange through refinancing. Donna Whitfield, charged with identity fraud and filing a false instrument, entered a plea arrangement that involved a substantial fine, mandatory restitution, and 2 years of supervised probation. The visit to my employer, which Daniel Reeves confirmed in a formal statement, resulted in an additional civil judgment against her for defamation, the settlement of which was quietly devastating. Marcus and I were divorced 7 months after the night he left me on Route 9. I signed the final papers on a Thursday in October in Susan Park's office, with a view of autumn trees going copper and gold against a white sky. I felt the things I expected to feel, and some things I didn't. I felt the loss of what I had believed the marriage was, which was not the same as the marriage. I felt something else underneath the grief. Not triumph exactly, but a sense of weight leaving my body, of space opening up around me, like a room that has been overcrowded for a long time and is finally aired out. There is a particular kind of knowledge that comes after a betrayal like this, a knowledge that is unwanted and irreversible and eventually useful. I know now that I mistook tolerance for strength for a long time. I mistook the ability to absorb difficulty quietly for a kind of wisdom, when really it was just a form of avoidance. I kept the peace long past the point when the peace was worth keeping, and I told myself the story of a good marriage the way you hold a shape with your hands in water, with effort, against the current, until you're too tired to keep holding. I don't blame myself for that, but I don't pretend anymore that I didn't see the signs. The following spring, I sat on my wraparound porch on Elmwood Drive with a cup of coffee going warm in my hands, watching the backyard flood the way it did every April, the low corner by the fence turning to a shallow silver lake in the early morning light. The cherry tree I'd planted the first summer was blooming, pink and reckless, petals dropping into the standing water. Inside, my father was making breakfast. He visited most weekends now, sleeping in the guest room that had once been a home office that Marcus had never quite set up. The house smelled of coffee and warm wood and the particular freshness of a spring morning coming through windows that were entirely mine to open. My phone buzzed, a text from Susan Park. The final disbursement from the Rourke civil case had cleared. I read it, set the phone face down on the porch railing, and looked at my backyard and my blooming tree and my small, flooding, entirely beloved corner of the world, and I thought, some things you don't repair. Some things you rebuild from scratch, and the new version is better because you chose every single piece of it yourself. The coffee was perfect. The morning was cold and bright and completely quiet, and it was mine.